Molly, your memoir, More, has been described as brutally honest, warts and all. It's a
Yes.
story of your journey into polyamory and more so even into self-discovery. So, why did you want to share this part of your life with the world?
No, it's such a good question, which I sometimes ask myself over and over and over again as I face the music, so to speak. Um, yeah, it was kind of a naive decision in many ways
Mhm.
because I don't know that I fully knew the impact it was going to have. I mean, I wrote the book in some ways not really expecting it to be published, not expecting it to make the splash that it has made, um, and not thinking about people like, my children and my parents reading it. But ultimately, I think I still stand beside, and behind the decision to write it because I felt like nobody else was telling this story. And I think just whether you have an open marriage or not, which most people do not, I think the fact that I am a mother who is revealing myself as a whole person, as a sexual being, as somebody with wants and needs and desires that don't just get turned off when walk down the aisle or have a baby. Um, I wanted to tell that story and felt like I was well positioned to tell it better than anyone else maybe would. So I'm still glad I did it, even though there's been a little more fallout than I had anticipated.
Your husband, Stuart, is your co-conspirator in all of this. The question I know that is on everybody's mind is how about your children? So, what kind of conversations did you have with them as this book was being published?
Yeah, I mean, they're very different, my two kids. So, my older son, who I call Daniel in the book, these are not their real names, but he's very chill. And he's the one, when the book opens, it's him learning that we have an open marriage at age 13. And he has always been not just, even keel within himself, but also kind of just an old soul. And I've always felt like we're contemporaries more than I'm like his mom and he's my
Yeah.
kid. I am his mom and he is my kid, but now he's 22. So he's very well launched. He read the book and said, "Yeah, it's good, Mom." He said, "I skipped over the nitty gritty parts, but
Awesome.
he mostly took it in stride." My youngest did not want to read it and still has some, anxiety around my promoting it, talking about it. But he's also 19. One of the beautiful things that we've been able to talk about as we've been moving forward is the fact that, we now have an adult relationship in many ways. And most of your relationship years with a child is with them as an adult. I mean, if you think about your own relationship with your parents, you're a kid for a short amount of time. Many of those years you don't even remember. And then you're a teenager and you're already, pressing up against it. So there's a lot to be said, I think, for reshaping the relationship and the dynamic between a parent and child as they get older. And it doesn't mean that all of the boundaries are down, all of the privacy is lost. I think it's ultimately positive because we're kind of been catapulted into a more adult relationship.
I've never thought about that, Molly. You're right. We do spend so many more years as adults in the parental child relationship. That's interesting.
Yeah. And we put so much focus on, well, the kids are only kids for like a minute.
The
You know
kids
what
are
I mean?
real.
And then you're like, whoa, like,
Yeah.
yeah, mine. And I still feel like I hope to be alive for decades more. And so
Yeah.
if you want to have a relationship that grows and evolves with your kids, you need to lay some groundwork early. I think that, hey, I'm not just here to make you snacks and pick up your socks. Like I actually am a person with thoughts and feelings.
I heard this the other day too, that how your children treat you once they're adults and no longer need food or shelter is a reflection of how you treated them as children. And I think
Hmm.
that's very true also.
All right. I like that. I like that. And I do feel like I have a good, respectful relationship with both my kids. Not without its tensions, not without its issues, but they've been really good sports. I'll say that much. They've been really good sports. They're pretty nice to me.
So this all started because of a man that you call Matt in this orange book. Okay.
Yes.
So
Yes.
for anyone who hasn't read it yet, can you take us back to the moment that you met this man named Matt and he was the one who sparked the open marriage conversations with your husband, Stuart?
Yeah. So it was, a solid 16 years ago now. My kids, it's crazy. My kids were 6 and 3 at the time. And I was, you're in the trenches in those years when your kids are little. It's just nonstop. You don't go to the bathroom by yourself. You don't like sleep. You don't, all those things are just distant memories, let alone your own, sexuality or vibrancy as a woman. So I was staying home from work for a while. I had worked right away after my kids were born and then was like, wait a minute, what am I doing? I got to stay home. And so my husband was working late. He did have to work late sometimes. And it was part of our agreement, really, that this was going to be the way it was if I was staying home. But I still got mad. And so he was late and I just stormed out when he got home. I mean, the kids were in bed, but I was like, the other thing they don't tell you about parenting is that it kind of feels like house arrest sometimes because they're in bed. They don't actually need you to do anything, but you can't leave. And so this is where we've lost the nature of the village when you can just like step outside of your hut and get some air, maybe. Like in Brooklyn, that didn't ever feel like an option. So I waited till he got home and then I stormed out. And I ran into a person that I used to teach with on the street, and she took me to a bar where Matt and some other of her friends were. And we started flirting with each other. And it was like, I was like literally just in a hoodie, no makeup. I'm not like a big makeup person anyway, but like, I was not feeling my best. And here's this younger, cute guy who was interested in me in a way that really, really sent some sparks flying that I wasn't expecting at all. I wasn't expecting to go out that night. I wasn't expecting to go into a bar with a friend. I wasn't expecting to meet somebody who flirted with me. And I certainly wasn't expecting the feelings that all brought up and the excitement around it that simultaneously felt thrilling and terrifying because I was like, well, what do I do with this?
So you describe this feeling almost as an obsession.
Yeah.
But what I found really interesting is that you say the obsession with Matt wasn't actually about him. It was about you. What do you mean by that?
I think it was an obsession with how it made me feel. That it was like a dopamine hit. You know what I mean? That's what all obsessions really are. It wasn't that he was, he was a great guy, but he wasn't the be all end all. Like he wasn't actually secretly my soulmate or something like that. It was just someone who reflected back to me my own desirability, my own vitality. When I saw the way he looked at me, I saw myself differently. And it was a way that I hadn't seen myself for a while, being in total mother mode for the previous 6 years, 7 if you count pregnancy, which I kind of do. So it had been a while and since I had felt that way. And I think I got kind of addicted to that feeling and wanting more of that.
That feeling is addicting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you go home and you chat with Stuart. Most people, I think, would just like go home and be like, that was fun and suppress it all. You do the opposite. You go home and you talk to your husband, Stuart, about it. And he says something that I think is surprising to people, which is, why don't you go pursue this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did any part of you want him to be territorial over you, or did you appreciate that he said, go explore this?
I don't think I ever have really wanted him to be territorial because it didn't ever feel like he was saying, wiping his hands or, getting rid of me and sending me off on my way. He's always been somewhat titillated by the idea of me with other people. And I write about this in the book. We had done a little bit of experimenting, a couple trips to a sex club, a threesome with one of his ex-girlfriends, but just, few and far between kinds of experiences that I thought was just done by the time we had kids, as most people do, that I'm like, well, that was,
That
fun
was
for
fun.
him more than it was fun for me, because I didn't ever really like the anonymity of it. It took me a while to figure this out. It's kind of an embarrassingly long time, and you see the trajectory of this and more. But it took me a long time to figure out that I really prefer connected sex to just physical casual sex. But I didn't think that connected sex was available to me anymore. I thought like, okay, well, maybe I can just have some, fun experiences and get that out of my system, because of course I can't ever have a connection with another person once I'm married. So everything that happened after that, it was an evolution, was a transformation from that point forward. But Stuart has always been pretty consistent. I think I changed a lot more than he did. He's always kind of been this way. He's never been a territorial, jealous type. And he's always been, wanting me to be my happiest self. So he
Yeah.
called it years before we got married, before we even got engaged, that
Hmm.
I was going to want to explore my sexuality more even after we got married. I was very, not a virgin, but virginal, I will say. When we got married, I had just, one boyfriend for 4 years and a couple other like brief encounters. And he had been with a lot more people than that, and was kind of like, I don't think you're going to be okay with this. And maybe in part, he also wasn't going to be okay with it. People have asked me that question. We've talked a lot about it since. But I also think, he knew it was going to be something I needed to explore, and he wasn't wrong.
Well, one of the things that I loved reading about was your commitment to each other, because I think people hear the term open marriage and they think like kind of that it means that you're not fully committed to that other person or to
Yeah.
one person. And I felt like your story shared the exact opposite. Like you even turned to Stuart to be the one to comfort during a hard breakup, which was
Yeah.
really interesting for me to read. What were some of the preconceived notions of open marriages that you had that like absolutely just broke through once you experienced it?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, for one thing, I thought that it was not possible to love more than one person.
Yeah.
That loving another person would mean I loved Stuart less, or that him loving another person would mean there was less love for me. And so, early on when we started really opening up our marriage, that was like a firm rule: no falling in love. It had to be just sex. And as I said, didn't really end up doing it for me. But I did not expect what happened, which was that when I loved another person, it made me love Stuart more. And once I had experienced that, then I could believe the same was true for him. I only know my own experience. But I feel more connected to Stuart now. And he does have, the person who I call Kiwi in the book. They're still going strong, and they're 9 years in now at this point. And he's had other relationships too. And it doesn't actually take away from his love for me. And in some ways, it just kind of crystallizes it, and it makes it so, there's something so beautiful about the fact that we choose each other over and over and over again, and we understand each other and each other's history more than any other person can. So new people can come and some go and some stay, but there's nobody that I have built a life with the way I've built a life with Stuart. There's nobody I've been through all of these different stages with. And we have each other's back, and we understand how to support each other better than maybe anybody else ever could. So I don't ever feel like I'm in competition with somebody else. And I don't think Stuart ever feels like he's in competition. Like nobody can ever replace Stuart in my life, but there are people who can add to it, add to my life. And Stuart is, you know, always on board for me having another positive relationship because he knows that it just ends up making me happier and therefore a stronger kind of person and partner for him.
I'm going to ask you a question that I don't quite know how to phrase. So bear with me as I
Sure.
stumble through this. You and Stuart are each other's love and life partners. So you just described like building this life, which includes holidays and funerals and all the things that come with building a family.
Yeah.
How does it work with these other partners that you two have? Because it's not just disconnected sex, like these are relationships. How does
Yeah.
it work when something monumental, good or bad, happens in your life or in these partners' lives? Like, for instance, say someone has a parent who passes. Um, do you go to the funeral? Do they join you? Like, how does it work logistically within your lives?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the relationship and the person. So there are some people we date who, like Kiwi, for example, has a husband. And so she has her primary partner who can support her when things like that happen. So I think it gets trickier when there's somebody who maybe doesn't have that primary partner. But the way the way I phrase it actually with a partner I've had for like 2.5 years who doesn't have another primary partner, because he was kind of trying to figure out, he's like, well, how will this work if you're, you know what I mean? And I was like, well, let's think of it this way. And I kind of like this analogy. You know, like when you have to fill out your emergency contact form and you have to list like 3 people maybe that, you know, to call in case of an emergency. So I was asking him, like, who's on your list right now? And he's like, yeah, well, my mom and, you know, my best friend and whatever. And I was like, well, I'd like to be on the list. You know what I mean? I'd like to be on your emergency contact list so that when something goes down, you can call on me. And maybe I can't be always there all the time. If, you know, like, oh, what my partner I've had for 3.5 years had knee surgery and his wife was out of the country. And I went and stayed with him for 4 or 5 days after while he was recovering and was taking care of him, whatever. And I asked Stuart, I was like, is that cool? And he said, sure. He didn't need me home. If they both had like been in body casts at the same time, that would have been challenging. But
Right.
it's also true, like when you have more than one child. You know, if both your kids really need you at the same time, it's a challenging time. But usually there's a little bit ebb and flow where one person is like, you know, hopefully we don't have everybody in crisis all the time,
Right.
but you do your best, just like when you have good friends too. And not everybody can show up for you all the time because other things might be going on in their life, but you know that they're giving what they can to you because they love you. And
Mhm.
so that's kind of the way I think about it, if that helps.
Yeah. Well, one of the guys that you dated, Scott, turned out to be not on the same page regarding
Yeah.
some of the open relationship rules or ideas. And
Yeah.
just to set the stage, he started dating you when his wife wanted to be in an open relationship. She
Yeah.
ended up meeting somebody else and asking for a divorce. And then Scott wanted you to leave Stuart for him, which you ultimately would not. So
Right.
I can imagine these situations do come up when you're feeling really connected to people. Like when you just said, I stayed with him in the house for 5 days, my immediate
Yeah.
thought was, ooh, it's kind of interesting to like play house with somebody. Do you get used
Yeah.
to them and then think, oh, maybe I don't want to go home? How does that work?
Yeah, well, it's funny. Like it was lovely being with him that time. He has a dog. I don't have a dog. He lives in a cool part of Brooklyn, way cooler than my part of Brooklyn, but I still like love my home and my family.
Right.
And he also loves his freedom. You know what I mean? I don't think he wanted me to move in any more than I wanted to move in. So, so yeah, I mean, I guess what Stuart and I have always said to each other is not always said to each other. We had to kind of arrive at this place, but now we say to each other, you know what? If you end up meeting somebody that you would just much rather build a life with than me, then I don't want to be the one to hold you back. We kind of laugh at that now because we are now, 15 years into this, and that hasn't happened yet. We give each other so much freedom and space to do the things we want to do. I don't know what it is that what I would want that Stuart doesn't already, give me the space to do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but I think it's still like, there are things we have to maybe navigate if somebody wants to take a trip or somebody wants, which we've done. We've kind of checked almost every box you can think of at this point.
Yeah.
So it's like, we just kind of deal with it as things come up with the understanding that like we want to be honest with each other and respect each other's feelings. I don't want to hurt Stuart.
Mhm.
He doesn't want to hurt me. We love each other. So we try to be reasonable and also considerate of what the other person wants. But there are way fewer things that come up now that like that rankle the other person. We're getting pretty good at this navigation thing.
It seems like it requires radical honesty, though.
Oh, it does. It does. And both of us would say, we not only know each other better as a result, but we know ourselves a lot better. And as you said right at the beginning of this, that more is the story of self-discovery just as much as it is of everything else. Because as I was opening the marriage, as I was, having to dig deep within myself to explain what I wanted to Stuart, I was also explaining what I wanted to myself and finding some information that I wouldn't have known otherwise. I was in therapy for
Mm-hmm.
those 10 years that I write about and more. We did couples therapy for a year in order to get some good communication skills under our belt. And I think all of that was super helpful. But yeah, you can't, people who want to do an open marriage without the honesty part, it's just, these are just terms, right? Open marriage. There's like degrees maybe of openness. There are some people who have more of a don't ask, don't tell policy, which we tried briefly and it failed miserably. Stuart is a terrible liar, which like when people ask, like, do you think when he said he was at work, like even before you opened the marriage, do you think he really was? And I'm like, if he was pulling that off, like he can't lie to save his life. And so I was finding him out. And when I was asking him to lie and then getting angry at him when he wasn't lying well enough. So that was no good. But it maybe different things work for different people. And I think we had to go through all of these different stages in order to, mess up and hit up against the guardrails and see like, oh, I don't think this is going to work. So
Yeah.
like all of the steps along the way, we didn't just jump from there to where we are now. It was a long road.
Well, I
And
love
not
that.
everybody would like to be on that road. And I don't blame them at all.
I love that you mentioned therapy because your therapist had you do something that really caught my eye. It was a freedom list. So
Yeah.
you want freedom from things you want freedom to be and freedom to do.
Yeah.
Why was that an exercise that your therapist thought you should do?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is my therapist had a nickname for me for like kind of like part of myself. Yeah, now I feel like people do parts work more, like looking at the different parts of themselves. But it was a revelation to me that there was this person inside me who he called straight A Molly, because I was always a very good girl. I skipped
Yeah.
a grade. I was young and like kind of an overachiever my whole life. And straight A Molly just followed the rules and did everything she was supposed to do. And part of, I think, what open marriage was for me was this opportunity to be transgressive. So it was kind of funny that I needed my therapist to then give me permission to be transgressive. But he did. And so like the kind of freedom, like there was something I wrote on my freedom list, like freedom to do stupid shit, which was a big catch-all, you know what I mean? But what that allowed me to do is to make mistakes and to say like, I'm not going to, and I loved my therapist for this, that it wasn't about me getting an A+ in open marriage. That, that was kind of what I wanted to do.
Oh my
I
God, that's
wanted,
so funny.
yeah, like, but I definitely, you read the book and like, oh, this is not like a how-to manual at all. What I
Yeah.
needed to do was to just be messy and let it all hang out and find out what my shadow side looks like, and find out that my husband loves all the parts of me, even the messy parts, and even the parts that weren't really doing the right thing much of the time.
How do
But
you
I
do that
made
in a
it through that.
responsible way? Because like you have a job and you have children. So like how do you incorporate straight A Molly who like needs to exist in the world and give yourself permission to be a human mess?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't pretty. I feel like I kept myself together with the kids and with the at work, but I feel like one kind of serves the other in some ways. The thing that comes later is the integration. But at first, I think I just needed to let this part out of me. One of the things I wrote about in the book, which is a real theme of my life for a while, is migraines. I had these terrible migraines that I think came from repression and repressing like anything that didn't fit the straight A Molly mold or even thinking about it. But I think I had a lot of anger, and I think I had a lot of, pent up frustration and wants and needs that I wasn't expressing because I was trying to be a good mother and a good wife and a good teacher and a good friend and a good daughter and a fill in the blank, just a good everything. And I needed to just, it usually happened late at night when I would go out and go do crazy shit and then come back in and have the stability of my husband. And luckily, yeah, things could have gone badly. I didn't end up having, I had a couple of bad experiences with men that I write about, nothing that, ended up endangering my well-being, luckily. But that's the risk you take, in my opinion. Everybody is managing their own risk when they step out of their house. Like, you can get hit by a bus, but not everybody agrees with that framework for life, but it's kind of the way I roll these days. So I had to explore that part of myself separately from my good girl self. And I think the stage I'm in now in my life, and the book has been a huge part of, is integrating those two things and being like, well, this is me. This is all of me, and not partitioning and not compartmentalizing, but just being like, yeah, this is what it means to be a person. And I think ultimately that's a better thing to model for children than it is to pretend, especially, I have boys. So for boys, I think it's important for them to see that, this is what a whole woman is like, not, some kind of idealized, virgin figure that we often define women as either the virgin or the whore. And guess what? We're a little bit of both. We're everything in between. And for girls, if you have daughters, I think it's super important for girls to see the range that goes into being a full-grown woman.
As I'm hearing you say this, I'm thinking about how few people ever reach that point, even at their life, to really have lived authentically and integrate all of their parts. Kudos
it's a lot
to
of
you.
work. Thanks. I mean, I'm still a work in progress. I don't want to get too,
no, I think
arrogant about it.
You're honest about it in the book. Like, I think there are hot and alluring elements to the story, but you talk about how you felt alone in your relationship and your struggle with jealousy. You let it all hang out. It doesn't sound arrogant at all.
All right. Well, good.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you can talk about what it's like to experience heartbreak and rejection within a relationship. How did you guys navigate those experiences together?
Well, it's always been harder for me to help Stuart through his feelings, but I'm way better at it now. So when he's had breakups, it's been harder for me to see how hurt he is and to see the loss he's experiencing, because it sounds kind of messed up, but it would spark some jealousy in me that, like, oh, you really do care about her, because the fact that it's ending is making you this upset. I feel a lot easier with it now than I did even 5 years ago. And, the book ends at a moment more than 6 years ago. So we've been through a lot even since the book ends. For me, it's been so lovely having Stuart there to help me metabolize the feelings. I think sometimes my friends in particular, my friends, especially my married friends, sometimes have a hard time taking my outside relationships seriously, like they're not real. But they see it, now that they've met more of my partners, and currently I have a partner that I've had for 3.5 years and one for 2.5 years. And most of my friends have met both of them. And it's like a little more real to them. Like these people are real people to me. But for a while, Stuart was kind of one of the only people who could really understand what I was going through. And the other one was my mother. My mother was also really helpful to me.
Will you share why that is?
Yeah, spoiler alert. My parents also had an open marriage, but they didn't tell me at all. My aunt told me when I was 28. And so Sue and I were already like kind of on our journey. Like we had the conversation where he was like, I don't think you're going to be okay, never sleeping with someone else. But I didn't really talk about it with my mother until after the Matt episode in the book. I reached out to her, and she's continued to be a really great person for me to talk to about my relationships. She always says, she's living vicariously through me. She's 81 now and, in a wheelchair. And but she's still good friends with the person who I call Jim in the book, who was one of her partners. I just knew him as her best friend when I was a kid, but they've continued a really lovely friendship. And my father also has friendships with women that he was once intimate with. So I can see from the other side now too, like kind of what this might look like in the future. And I think it's really lovely to be able to have those relationships. And I have friends who are still close in some way with an ex, for example, not everybody. But that's, I didn't really have that going into my marriage. So it's nice to, I think, have that kind of energy with somebody that you once shared intimacy with, but maybe that part of your relationship is over, but it still adds something special to the mix as you age,
You just mentioned that your friends have met some of your partners.
Yeah.
What does dating look like for you? What is dating and sort of having these multiple relationships at once look like for your friends? Because I'm 33, I'm single, and I'm like, oh, it's so complicated. How do you do this with multiple people?
Well, part of it is when you're non-monogamous, nobody expects to be your everything. You know what I mean? And if they do, it's not going to work, which is why my relationship with Scott ended. So you're kind of creating the relationship as you go. Over the years, I've had partners that also have a wife. And then it's kind of clear, like, okay, you've got your people, I've got my, family.
That's more cut and dry.
Yeah, a little bit. My current partners don't have primary partners right now, but one of them, he laughs at me whenever he hears me say this on a podcast, but he would agree it's true. Like his work is his primary partner. He owns a couple nightclubs in Brooklyn, and he's working late, and he has to work pretty much like every Friday and Saturday night. So it's great for him that I am not like, really, you can't see me again on Friday night. I'm like,
right.
Have a great weekend. You know what I mean? So it's like very freeing for him too. Yeah. Or my other partner still has like young children that he's with as much time as he can be with them. And so like, I'm also not going to be like, what? You can't spend Christmas with me? Like, no, you can't. You know what I mean? So it's like, it kind of works in lots of ways. Both of them are free also to see other people. As am I, if it comes up. But yeah, it kind of looks like that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
Did you lose any friends when you decided to be public about your open marriage?
No, I haven't lost any friends. I haven't, like, no family members have been upset. Like,
Awesome.
it's been really great in so many ways. My sister read the book, like several of my cousins read the book, my aunts, both my parents, my older son read it, as I said, and ended up just like reaching out to me. And it's, if anything, made our relationships deeper.
Yeah.
And my parents too, my mother was concerned that like she's getting outed, that especially people of her generation would be
Mhm.
judgmental, or and to your point earlier about so few people really living authentically. She had a college friend email her and say, oh, I just read Molly's book, you're so brave to be showing yourself like this. And this woman said, I don't think I've ever done anything without worrying what other people would think for
Mm.
my whole life. And she's 81 years old. And it just, oh, but it was so touching that she recognized that in herself and recognized at this moment, like, oh, maybe there are things that I don't have to keep secret. Maybe this isn't a source of shame. Or, I've also had a lot of people that either I know or don't know quite as well, sharing all sorts of things with me,
I'm sure you've
even
opened the
if they're
lid for people to just really tell you about their experiences.
right. And I think that's cool, because I think it's like, it's just permission. And when we walk through the world owning our messiness and not trying to pretend like, oh yeah, I've got it, I've got the picket fence and the whatever.
Yeah.
Um, it invites people to be vulnerable and to share more of themselves, and it deepens connections and it deepens relationships, and it lets the shame out of the bag and allows those kinds of things to heal. So I think that makes me really happy in terms of the way the book's been received.
Do you think we put too much stock in one person being everything? Do you believe in soulmates?
I don't believe in everybody having a soulmate. I believe that you can have multiple soulmates. I think um, I think I think of soulmate kind of like in terms of where you and another person are in terms of your path of growth and evolution. Like we're all, I believe, here on this planet in these bodies to learn and to grow. And so finding the person or people, and it can be multiple people, and I think we feel this way with our friends. There are multiple people usually in our lives that we feel like we can reveal parts of ourselves to, that's one person understands this part of ourselves better than anybody else. And
Yeah.
so it allows us to grow in that way. It is possible for one person to check a bunch of boxes, for sure. But I think it's okay to like have some boxes that are not checked by that person, and to find that connection elsewhere, be it through friendship or, non-monogamy.
Has this changed the way that you would have viewed going into marriage as your younger self? Like, do you think you would have looked for the same things in a partner? Did your subconscious lead you to what you were meant for? It sounds like the answer is yes, actually.
Yeah. Well, Stuart's 5 years older than me, and he had dated a lot. And so he met me when I was still with my college boyfriend. We met at my best friend's birthday party when she was 25. I was still 23. But he says he saw me and he just knew. And then it was a matter of like convincing me, which didn't take long. Once I had broken up with the boyfriend, it was like by our second date, I was like, okay, this is good.
Oh, wow.
My mother asked me a question, which was, how do you feel about yourself when you're with him? And I said, I feel amazing. He made me feel amazing. And I always felt with him like I could be my whole self. Like he saw my whole self. I say in the book at one point, I feel like he knows me better than I know myself. I don't know that that's true anymore. But back when I was hiding lots of parts of myself from myself, I think he saw those parts before I honored them.
Yeah.
And his being able to like see those parts, love those parts, has always made it easier for me to be my most authentic self. So in that sense, yes, he is the perfect partner for me. I have a high standard now, though. So when I look for other partners, I only want to be with other partners who also make me feel amazing, and maybe in a slightly different way. And maybe, we do different things together. We share different things, but I always have that base with Stuart. And it feels like I'm obscenely lucky to have this, because it also, you asked the question before about what's it like to have, to have a breakup within a marriage. And it takes a lot of the pressure off. I don't agonize so much over what's going to happen with my other relationships. I trust, I don't see my other relationships ending, maybe ever. I don't see any reason to stop loving another person. I still love Scott. I do. There's no reason for me to withhold my love from somebody else, because I'm good. I have all the love I need,
Right.
and I can offer that. If they love me back, that's great. But I don't
The whole
feel,
title.
more. I've got more. Love begets love is one of my lines from the book. So it does feel less angsty now. Like, oh, will this last? What will happen? And I'm like, things will happen the way they're supposed to happen, is kind of where I've landed now.
I'm going to break one of my personal and professional rules on
Ooh,
absolutes. In the
goody,
spirit of
goody.
breaking rules,
Yeah.
um, I try to stay away from always, never, best, worst, etc.
Oh,
But
yeah.
what has been the best and worst part of this experience?
Yeah. The best and worst part. I mean, I can be like frustrating and say it's the same. It's like, but I do think cracking myself open like a walnut, hurt like hell in many ways. If I'm thinking like kind of big picture, the worst part was having to look inward and realize that I, you know, didn't have a lot of self-worth. I didn't have a lot of inner resources. I was outsourcing to Stuart in a lot of cases my sense of self and my feelings of worth. And so in some ways that was really hard to realize, and to like kind of feel the loneliness of that, of feeling like I couldn't give to myself what I wanted him to give me. And then the best is realizing, oh, wait a minute, I can give it to myself, and then I can receive it from him and from anybody else.
Congratulations. That's really hard to do. You've touched on this a little bit throughout our conversation, but I want to sort of touch on it explicitly. In the book, you talk about the stigma around women and their sexuality.
Yeah.
How do you think we break through this? Like, I think that this has been sort of a stereotype and plight of women from the beginning of time. I think back to Greek mythology, and it's written in all of it. Like, we're always the seductress, and
Yeah.
our sexuality is always seen as sort of illicit.
Yeah.
In
Yeah. Well said.
2024, how do we change that? I think you're part of changing that.
I hope so. I will also say, I feel like the place we're in as a society with gender, I think is going to reap some huge benefits for both genders, ultimately, for all genders. I think as everyone, in Brooklyn, non-binary people are everywhere, and part of the fabric of life now. And sharing your pronouns is part of the fabric of life in Brooklyn. And I hope that will continue to expand. I think what that allows for, and I think some people are very afraid of, because change can be scary, but I think it's helping us, maybe as a society, redefine, what does it even mean to be female or male? I mean, when you look at it biologically speaking, a fetus looks the same, whether it's a baby boy or a baby girl, until a certain stage of development. And elderly people start to lose their sex hormones and kind of become more like one another. Testosterone dies down, and you'll see men with hips and women with little beards, and we're human beings ultimately. So we evolve into and out of our gender, just biologically speaking. And so I think these rules that we've attached to this is what women do and this is what men do, I think it's going to start to naturally break down as we kind of loosen this grip, this binary of like, this is what it means to be one thing or the other. And I hope that spreads more globally too. We're in a time where the binaries and the polarization is not serving anybody. We need to find our human, our human essence and our humanity in the middle, as much as we can. We are not all one thing or the other. It's not us versus them. We are all in this together.
Well said.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We can hope. We can hope.
So one of my favorite quotes in the book is this: everything that happens in life is an opportunity to learn about yourself. Marriage, motherhood, relationships, even anger and illness. Everything is an opportunity to learn and grow.
Yeah, that's my mom. My mom said that.
She is so wise. She
is. I've got goosebumps.
I did too, as I read it. She's so ahead of her time. What has been the biggest learning for you? I know that's a hard question because it's been an excavation of self.
I think it's both kind of the internal and the external. In the internal, I feel like the opportunity has been to befriend my quote unquote flaws, to make peace with like my anxiety or the times that I don't feel like being a mother, because sometimes I don't, to own that and to be like, that's okay. It doesn't mean I don't want my kids to exist. It just means I don't want to have to take care of anyone right now, So making peace with that and being like, that's okay that I feel that way. So that's a big opportunity. And then I think also it just makes you, if you can really take that in, it makes you move through the world differently. So, when you're standing in line and you're like annoyed or you're stuck in traffic or something, to be like, okay, there's some impatience coming up here. Like, what's that about? Like, what am I in such a hurry to get to? Maybe now is actually, maybe I could like do some breathing. Maybe I could listen to an audiobook, like it can range from the small to the huge. If you really start viewing everything as an opportunity, or every argument, I think that's a big one for me too. Like, instead of seeing conflict as like, oh no, we're fighting, be like, okay, we're fighting. Like, what are the feelings that are coming up here? And how can I respond and learn something about myself, or maybe you learn something about yourself, that we don't have to fear conflict. We can just kind of like see it as an opportunity.
I'm going to do a few rapid fire questions with you.
Oh boy. Okay. Let me get ready.
What is the best communication tip that you've learned in relationships?
Carving out time for it. If things are coming up, especially in marriage, when you've got kids, if you don't, it doesn't mean sweep it under the rug, but it's not always the right time to have a fight, right? So if you can just put a pin in it and say to your partner, I'm going to need to talk about what's happening right now, but not now. Like, can we please make some time to talk about it later? Because if you can talk about it when you're not in the heat of the moment, it's gonna be a lot more efficient. You know what I mean? You're going to be able to have a little time to think about it. You'll have time carved out. People won't be reactive. That's really hard to do. But if you can swing it to like make kind of like fighting dates.
Really good advice. First date deal breaker.
Oof, not asking questions, just being too, and sometimes people are just very quiet. It's not even that they're grandstanding, but if you can't ask questions, I'm not interested. I honestly feel like this is tough, because I wanted to say A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle, which was like deeply impactful for me. I don't know if everybody should read it, because I don't know that it would be speaking to everybody. You know what I mean? If you open it up and it's not speaking to you, then maybe not.
I may add really quickly,
yeah.
I opened it a few times and it didn't speak to me because I wasn't in the place. And I've opened it up and it does speak to me. So you're right.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. So like this is what's hard with books. Like I can say the books that have spoken to me, but I don't actually believe that everybody should read certain books because some people will feel it and some people won't. For me, I read Anna Karenina 3 times.
Okay.
I read it when I was 20, when I was 30, and when I was 40, but you have to get like a really good translation. Like look up the award-winning translations. There are a couple. And I learned a lot about myself from different vantage points. Then when I turned 50, I didn't want to read it again. And I was surprised. And I looked it up and Tolstoy wrote it when he was 48. So then I was like, oh, that made me feel like, oh, I've passed Tolstoy. I was like, okay, I think I got
Learned
everything.
it.
I don't think he has anything for 50-year-old me, but 20-year-old me, 30-year-old me, 40-year-old me, I got a lot out of it.
That's really interesting.
And we will say, don't think I'm just dissing female writers because it is widely believed that his wife's editing is what made that book what it is. So Tolstoy's name is on it, but his wife is an equal co-author. It's a great book to understand relationships, I think.
I actually haven't read it, so I'm going to add that to my library. Thank you.
Get a good translation.
So, in the spirit of questioning everything, which is my motto, but it actually is your motto too. We share it.
Yeah.
I'm going to pick a card. So, you let me know when to stop.
Oh, I tell you when to stop. Stop.
What's the best thing you've ever quit?
I quit a relationship pretty recently that by all, like on paper, it seemed great. And we had been dating for about 6 months, but it wasn't feeding me. I was feeling more drained than fed by the time I was spending with him. And I couldn't put my finger on why. One thing, very interesting thing that happened along the way, though, is this sounds really weird. Like when I kissed him, like he started to taste and smell different to me. And Stuart has like a super smell sense or whatever. And so that made total sense to him. It's never happened to me before. But I felt like it was my body telling me like, not for you. And I still like, I ran into him recently, gave him a big hug, like no hard feelings, but like, it was good for me to just really listen to my inner self and not be like, oh, there's no reason to break up with it. I just didn't want to anymore. And I didn't have to. So I stopped. And I did it as kindly and as honestly as I could. I didn't tell him about the taste and smell though, because I felt that might make him, I don't know. That felt like it might be mean.
Or it was like you said, it was your body. He didn't need to know.
Right. It was just something in my chemistry that was saying like,
yeah,
move away from this.
Yeah, this is like totally that. TMI, but in the spirit of this interview, I one time kept having I was with a boyfriend and I kept getting UTIs, and I really think it was my body saying no more. And we broke up and I stopped getting them.
Yeah. And UTIs can really be a stress response too. It's like when your body is not, I've had periods of time where I've gotten lots of them. Actually, with Laurent, that guy, I was getting quite a few. So yeah, I think that's, it doesn't necessarily mean like it's the partner. It can be other things. I don't want every woman to be like, I just got a UTI, I'm getting a divorce. Like, but it's worth investigating. It is worth taking a look at what's happening.
My last question for you is, what is the smartest decision you've ever made?
I mean, marrying Stuart is up there. That was a good one. Mm-hmm. More recently, starting a meditation practice was the best gift I've ever given myself.
Did you start with guided?
I had tried a bunch of things, and I will tell you the type that I do. It doesn't mean that I think, again, like, just like I don't think everybody should read the same books. I don't think the same style of meditation works for everybody. For me, I love transcendental meditation. That's what I learned, TM. And I've been doing it for 5.5 years now. And it's been a gift. So deciding to do that and committing to it, because I do really meditate twice a day. And I've been doing that for 5.5 years. So that's a top one.
Molly, thank you so much for your time. And even more so, thank you for writing this book.
Oh, thank you so much. This was a great, great conversation.
Thank you.